So welcome to the next episode of the Prolific Super Producer Podcast. I'm your host, Tyson, and today with me I have Matt, or otherwise known as Sauniks. Nathan is not here today because he is moving to Tennessee. So while he is moving, I'm bringing on some guests to kind of fill up the space and really just pick other artists' minds about their music and their production processes. So hopefully this is super valuable for you. So a little bit about Sauniks. Sauniks is an electronic music producer. He has garnered millions of streams on his songs on Spotify and other streaming platforms. He has gotten sync placements on shows on Netflix. He has played in some of the largest clubs inside of Philadelphia, and ultimately is just an awesome human. So, Matt, welcome to the show, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tyson. It was on Hulu, not Netflix, just to correct.
Oh, Hulu. Okay, my bad.
It's okay.
It's one of the major streaming services, so it's still out there somewhere. What movie was it again? Can you remind me?
It was called The Binge 2. It's a wonderful binge. It was a comedy. It had like a bunch of like big actors in it, like Danny Trejo and Nick Swartzen, and it was about kind of like the movie The Purge, except it was like took place in a place where you couldn't have any like drugs or alcohol and stuff like that. But then there was one time of the year where everybody could do as much drugs or alcohol that they wanted. So then it would just be called The Great Binge. So it's kind of a silly idea. The movie is okay, but they ended up using my song at like the peak moment during the movie, so that was cool.
Oh, that's awesome. It's a cool song too, so I like constantly am reminded of it. Whenever I have to like think about an EDM producer, I always think about you because you're pretty much one of the only ones I know personally. And but then I always like show them that song because I'm like, oh, they'll recognize this one. Like it's an easy song. So it's a rendition of Carol of the Bells in obviously like a dubstep type. Is it dubstep?
Yeah, it's dubstep.
Okay. My clarity on like the subgenres of electronic music are poor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's okay.
Anyway.
You don't need to know.
Just for our audience here, let's back up a step and talk about like how you got into music initially and then how you kind of ended up in this world of electronic music specifically.
Music's been a big part of my life pretty much since I was in grade school. I kind of followed my sister into the music world because she was like joining choruses and like band and stuff like that. So I just kind of followed in her wake. And then as I progressed through grade school, I started to get better and better, and I actually had a natural talent for it. It was there in grade school I was first introduced to GarageBand. And we were showing like projects in class one day, and like everyone's song sounded terrible, but somehow mine was just like miles ahead of everybody else. So I thought to myself that there might be something there. And then when I got to college, I started DJing and discovered Skrillex. And I was a really big metalhead at the time. And then when I discovered Skrillex, I'm like, this is metal music, but with electronic sounds. This is awesome. So that's when I started to learn. I was curious on how to make it, and then downloaded Ableton or cracked it like everyone does when they started. That's pretty much how everything started from there. So here I am 11 or 12 years later.
So you were introduced to GarageBand in school, and so it was like a school project then?
It was a class called Computers and Music.
Oh, okay.
And they introduced you to DAWs and like MIDI and stuff like that. And the final project of the year was to create a song using GarageBand.
Yeah, so I think it's always interesting too, like looking at the difference between metal and EDM, because I feel like there's so many people that make that leap from metal over to the electronic side, because I think you mentioned it. It is really the same type of music, even though the public perception of those two styles is very, very different. But the actual music itself is almost identical between the two. So I think it's always fascinating to like see how many people actually make that leap from one to the other. So were you also in metal bands at the time, or was that just the music that you were kind of jamming to at the time?
I was in a band back then, but we just played like alternative rock really, because we were trying to be like an emo band. tight jeans, the whole thing, the whole 9 yards. There are no pictures, so don't ask me. But I was going to metal shows as often as I could. Like, I would go see The Devil Wears Prada in like a sweaty church basement. I would go to Warped Tour every single year. Like, a lot of the bands, like Attack Attack, I was really into them. I even remember seeing Katy Perry for the first time at Warped Tour before she blew up. And
cool.
I was like 10 feet away from her. And my friend and I would just admire how beautiful she was, and, you know, what teenagers usually do.
What did you play in the band? I don't even know. I don't even know this.
Oh, I play guitar.
So, okay. So do you actually play guitar then still on some of your productions then?
Yeah, my guitar is sitting over there. It's an LTD EMG pickups. So
Nice.
it's still, the metal guy in me is still around.
Okay. Yeah, because I noticed like there are, I've always like noticed that trend of like the productions that I've heard from you is that you have like some like rock and, you know, obviously metal influence to those productions, but I never like really thought of like, oh, like does he actually play anything? I don't know, because by the time we met, like you were 100% into the EDM world and you hadn't ever looked back.
Yeah, like after guitar was like one of my first instruments I ever learned. Then that progressed into singing, which I don't actually sing on any of my records, but it comes in handy with when I'm working with singers and stuff like that. Because then I can like sing the actual melody. I'm not actually tone deaf, and I can coach them through it, because usually the singers I work with are way more talented than me in that area. So I just let them do what they do. And other instruments I picked up was piano. I picked up trombone once just to play in one show. I was really bad at it, but it worked. Bass, guitar. Yeah, it was a bunch of different stuff.
No, that's funny. I used to play trombone too, and I played trombone all through school, like symphonic band, all that, the whole nine. That was a bad time.
Yeah, I prefer playing woodwinds over brass instruments.
Yeah, I could never
too much.
Yeah, I could never figure that out. The whole like you know, embouchure or whatever they call it, and on woodwinds, it's hard. Why don't you actually sing on any of your productions? Because like you're able to sing, and so is it just because like the singers that you work with are just way more talented than you and you just don't add anything to it, or like why don't you sing on your own records?
Well, it's a couple different reasons. One, usually the singers I work with are very talented at what they do because it's what they specialize in. The other reason is my voice doesn't always fit the creative vision of the track. Most of the time it doesn't. And the third reason is I'm a shy guy. So I get a little self-conscious when singing on stage or on rec. Even in a closed room with nobody around, it's still like listening back to my own voice just like weirds me out for some reason. So once I get past that, maybe I will start releasing records with my own voice. But I think of it kind of like Max Martin, because Max Martin is allegedly a very good singer, but he doesn't sing on anything. But people have said anecdotally, when they're in studio sessions with him and he's singing melodies for singers and whatnot, he actually has a really nice voice. I'm actually curious as to what he actually sounds like in real life, hearing those stories.
Because I feel like most of the songwriters that I know, or like, you know, who are in those rooms with big hits and stuff, a lot of times their voice ends up on the record just because they're like making the demo and it's like, oh, you know, this songwriter made that line, so he just like, you know, goes to the other room, records it just to like have record of it. But then at the end of the day, they're like, oh, this is actually a really cool part, like let's leave it in the record, and then we'll just like have the lead singer either sing over it or sing a harmony or like whatever, and they'll have like all of these layers of voices in there, and so like songwriters will often end up in the song kind of unintentionally and get credit for that. So it's kind of interesting that Max Martin isn't. Maybe he is actually, and he's just not credited with those credits. I think that would be interesting to look into.
Definitely some digging. I'm sure we can find some old Max Martin singing.
Yeah. I'll link them in the show notes if they are.
Yeah, right.
I just think that from my perspective, like thinking about it just from like a business standpoint, I would think that it would make sense for you to sing on your own records, because then you wouldn't have to like pay other singers to sing on your own record versus, you know, you could just do it for free for yourself. Obviously, like the whole creative aspect has a huge amount to do with it, but like assuming that it was a good, you know, like fit for your voice for the vision of that particular song, would you still I guess, self-consciousness about your voice still override your desire to actually sing on your own record?
Well, I definitely would do it at some point. I definitely plan on doing it at some point. I'm pretty good at forcing myself to get out of my comfort zone if I know the greater vision is enticing enough. I'm all for it, but like the other thing about working with other singers versus me doing my own work is creating a really good record is usually a team effort. Like all of my best songs are usually collaborations. And when you have someone else doing the singing, it allows me to focus more on the little details in the actual music. And I can also contribute to the melody writing, and then it becomes like more of a team effort so that when the singer and if they are also a writer, they come to the studio and we like write the melodies together and then work on the lyrics together. It's a team effort. It's like two heads are better than one, and it just goes to show.
I've had like similar experiences by collaborating with other people, just because there's like, you always think just like 1 + 1 = 2, right? But it's like when you get two people in the room, all of a sudden you're able to like kind of ping ideas off of one another, even if it's not like the same physical room, but like, the same project, right? Because you have an idea for the chorus that the melody should go this way, but then they have a different idea, and you're like, oh, like let's just combine the two somehow, and it'll be better essentially than either one of us individually could have come up with. So I've definitely come into those experiences too. I guess one question with like EDM, and talking about collaboration specifically, because a lot of artists or popular artists will collaborate with EDM producers to like create alternate versions of their tracks or something like that. They'll take their biggest hit and then be able to like hire an EDM producer to make an alternate version of that. Can you talk a little bit about just like, first of all, like the value of that? And then also secondly, like if I were an artist and I wanted to collaborate with you for a song that I have, like how would that process really work? And what would I be able to expect on my end as the artist hiring an EDM producer?
Pop artists do bring in a lot of EDM producers pretty regularly. A perfect example is the super popular artist Fred again. I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but he's a producer on a lot of other pop records. And for example, one of Ed Sheeran's albums, I forget exactly the name of it. I think it was one of his collaboration records. Fred again has credits on every single one of those songs in that album, which is rare for an EDM producer. When EDM producers are recruited by these pop artists, they're usually on like one song or two songs or a couple songs. When pop artists go and reach out to EDM producers, they're typically looking for a specific skill set or sound. One mistake beginning EDM producers will make a lot of the time when they're coming up is they try to be a jack of all trades, like being able to produce house music and dubstep and all these different things. But it's better to specialize in a particular kind of sound in EDM so that when you are brought in by a pop artist, you are very good at creating that specific sound. So that's typically how it would work. As far as the actual experience of when the producer comes into the studio, it works just like any other collaboration. Like you bounce ideas off each other, you write a song. I keep hearing schools and gurus online about music production. They say like collaborate with as many people as you can. That is really true, because a collaboration session for like one of my songs will look very different. Will look exactly the same as collaborating with a pop artist for their record. It's one and the same.
So why would somebody okay, so I guess a couple of things that I'm kind of taking out from this is that, first of all, like if you want to collaborate with somebody who's doing EDM music mostly, or EDM producer, then you would want to find somebody who has the very distinct style that you're going for whatever song you're trying to work on, right? So it's not like I'm going to go to a dubstep producer to produce like house music or vice versa necessarily, mm-hmm. right? Also, like what's the general like industry norm when it comes to like splits and things like that? Is it normally like a fee structure where I would just pay you to collaborate and like write the basically beat for my song in other terms, or is it more of a collaborative release? Like what's more normal, and what have you done in the past?
I've noticed, apologies if I look like a ghost, the light's coming in. The sun is starting to come up more right now. Every project is different. There's no one size fits all. It kind of matters on what the artist wants and things like that. Sometimes it's just an upfront fee. They buy you out of your rights of the song, and that's it. Because if you're contributing to the songwriting, you deserve a cut of the publishing and also the master as well. But sometimes the artist will negotiate with you on like different kinds of splits. Like if you are, in my general rule of thumb, everyone who's contributing to the record in the room deserves an equal split. I don't try to nickel and dime anyone out of percentages because everyone's work influenced the success of the song. Like, I'll give you an example. I had a song come out recently called Lovers in Space. There were 3 people working on that song. There was me, my friend Steven, and then there was Emmy. We all played a significant part in the success of that song and how it came out. So we all got equal splits. Sometimes an artist can't afford a fee, so then they might negotiate a different split ratio as a result. So I hate to say that it depends because it's usually a crappy answer, but yeah, it does. It depends.
I think it's really interesting when you're talking about like collaborations, because I feel like EDM is somewhat unique where you really are more of an artist than a producer necessarily, because a lot of like typical producers, I would say, even though they call themselves producer, really they're just glorified recording engineers, right? They're just recording the band, maybe mixing them, and that's really it. Versus like if you're collaborating, like you're putting a lot of like creative effort into the project and like creating, soundscapes and melodies and counter melodies and all like everything about the song. You're not just like hitting the red button and waiting for them to play the part. And so like with that, I think you really are approaching it much more as an artist rather than a recording engineer or like what most people refer to as producers nowadays. If you look at it from that perspective, then you're also looking at it from like, okay, if I'm just an artist now, but I'm collaborating with another artist, and I'm just like, I've been thinking about this recently in general, just like if I approach a bigger artist than me to collaborate on a project together, like there's essentially, obviously, because they're so much higher than me, there would be less incentive for them to work with me. But, if I'm able to even the tables a little bit somehow by like either giving them a larger split or like paying them an upfront fee to basically like launch myself into like their, kind of realm of experience and success in the music realm. I kind of want to pick your brain on like that type of like thought of like, if you're starting at day one, and you want to then like kind of like leapfrog your way up to like some sort of level of success, if you were like to work with larger producers than yourself, either like through electronic music or through just like collaborations with other artists, to like kind of just leapfrog your way up into the, higher echelons of the industry quickly. I'm just trying to like, I don't know. I'm just kind of curious, like pick your brain on like that thought of like, is that a good strategy, or is that just like something that would just be too hard to like actually execute on it?
I honestly don't see that often from my perspective. Granted, I'm sure it happens, but you can kind of think of it like this, getting like consulting from someone who's further along than you, or a little bit of mentorship. You could kind of think of it like that, because I know some people who have larger artists than them for like an hour of their time just to pick their brain. And usually, a lot of people don't know this, but this is a very powerful strategy, especially if you're trying to come up as a producer. You can just hit up an artist or a producer who's larger than you and ask and offer to pay them for an hour of their time, just like a consulting call or something like that. And then you pick their brain. Surprisingly, a lot of people would say yes. It's definitely worth trying for sure to help you accelerate higher or faster for your career.
So you think that just like getting the knowledge and the education essentially from them is far more valuable than like the actual collaborative project that, could potentially reach, millions of listeners or whatever, if it's a big enough artist?
Yeah. I mean, if you are a really skilled producer, writer, singer, or whatever, and you deploy this strategy, you're also allowing yourself to be put in front of these people, assuming they agree to work with you. And then the more exposure they have to you, then the more likely they're going to be like, and to your skills, the more likely they're going to be like, hey, Tyson, like, I want you to do this on a track. And then it's kind of like you're an intern, like a really skilled intern, and they want to actually like bring you on full time to start contributing more to the music. And then as you get better and better, then you start to contribute more and more to the projects. Your income goes up because you get better splits, better credits, so you can command higher fees and whatnot.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting just like always thinking about the mentality of like a pro versus amateur like producers and artists, because, and I think what you're kind of saying before too is just like getting in the room with people can be life-changing, right? Because it's just like a completely different mentality of like, if you've ever stepped into the room with like a professional songwriter when you weren't very good, like it's amazing the difference between like how they approach songwriting versus you. They're like talking about the story and they're talking about like the, you know, how the melody is related to the lyrics, and you're like, I never even thought about that before, right? And it's like, it seems like an obvious connection afterwards, but you just like don't necessarily make those connections. And so, or also I think another side of it is understanding what's possible. So like, you know, you always like put people up on a pedestal and you're like, oh, like they're just, you know, they were either super talented or they got lucky or they had rich parents or something like that. And then you just assume that they're successful because they had an unfair advantage somehow. But in reality, like when you get into the same room as them, that you realize like, oh, they're just human just like me. And now all of a sudden, like your belief of what is possible changes because you're like, okay, this person is acting like an idiot right now, just like I act like an idiot sometimes, like I could do it too. And then it completely shifts that belief of like what is actually possible within music. I don't know. Have you ever experienced that or like had that I guess had that experience with other people, like for yourself?
Like I've gone into studios with artists, EDM artists who've like toured and they've like done all these things. They have tons of credits and things like that. I learned things during those sessions that I would have never learned about. Like, I'll give you an example. I was in the studio with a group. They no longer tour anymore, but they were called Rocket Power. And they introduced me to the idea of a genre called color bass. And this was at a time before color bass was even hitting the scene. I think it was just starting. And the concept of it is taking like dubstep wubs and whatnot, and then running it through a vocoder that is sidechained to like a synth, like a keyboard, and it makes it more melodic and tonal and stuff like that. That's what color bass is. And when I saw them doing that in the studio, my mind was blown. I was like, why didn't I ever think to try that? That's so cool. So it's situations like that. If you're in the room with another skilled artist or producer, like there's always something you can learn. Like I even tried to do that with producers and artists that are still getting their feet wet. I'll have them here in the studio and we'll like work on a song together and they'll be like taking notes, and it makes me feel good that I can like pass on some knowledge like that. I was like when I was the small elephant in the room, like it's nice to be able to pass along that when they're the smaller elephant in the room. Rising tide lifts all ships kind of situation.
Most more experienced artists or producers or, you know, mixing, mastering engineers, whatever you are in music, once you experience some level of success, you're kind of always like looking for that next person kind of underneath of you to like invest into. I feel like that's just kind of a natural like course of both the human experience, but especially musically, because you're always like, you want to kind of pass on those lessons and can allow somebody else to avoid the same pain that you went through to learn those lessons. Whether they actually learn them or not, that's like another question. But if you just tell them, but that's the point. I just think it's interesting though. It's like people are way more willing to like really invest and mentor others, even from like a small, you know, one-off conversation, or just like, you know, if you happen to be in the room, like ask the question and then people will almost always invest in you if you're approaching them from a place of like humility and like understanding like, okay, I have a lot to learn from this person. And if you have that mentality, then they're more almost always willing to invest in you. Because I've experienced that in my own journey of like, you know, meeting mastering engineers and stuff that were way ahead of me, and I just asked them questions and they're like, oh yeah, like, you know, I do this and this and this, and like this is how you cut vinyl, and I'm like, oh okay, that's cool, I guess. So there's a lot to be gained just from like having a posture of humility versus trying to posture right as bigger than you really are.
And it definitely goes a long way when, like, if you're getting that mentorship from a bigger engineer or music professional, it's always, if you're still in contact with them, it's always good to ping them with examples of you implementing their advice, because then it gets them excited that, like, oh, I makes them feel good, like that they really helped you become a better music professional.
You don't want to like give somebody advice if you know they're not going to follow it. It's kind of worthless at that point. So no, that's a super pro tip. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
I kind of want to touch back on the whole introverted conversation, because you mentioned earlier that you don't sing on your own records because you're basically you're introverted, right? So like,
yeah,
we're both kind of that same way, just by default. And so I think it's an interesting conversation about how artists, how you can be an artist and be in music but still be introverted, because like from externally, like that's not really what you see, right? You see big personalities on stage, you see Taylor Swift, or what was her, Britney Spears, right? Like they're big personalities, at least they appear to be from the outside. And so I think that a lot of, and I guess I thought this too, that I would never be able to be a successful artist because I was introverted. And so I kind of wanted to pick your brain on that. Just like, what's your perspective on that? Like, obviously you've had, some success, but still being pretty introverted. So can you just talk about like either struggles you've run into, or just like, how you've kind of navigated that world as an introverted person?
Yeah. So in the EDM world, at least, if you're an electronic music producer, the stereotype is that you're shy or introverted, which is true. As you start to put yourself out more, you gain more confidence in yourself. But like, even at the stage I'm at, I'm still introverted. I'm still shy. Like every time I get up on stage to perform, I'm always super nervous right before I go on. But then I look back at like the videos of me performing, and it looks like I look like I'm the antithesis of introverted. I look like I don't look like Britney Spears, but I look like that I'm actually an extrovert, and I'm like commanding the crowd and stuff like that, which in the moment, when I'm in those moments, it feels really good. And then once I get off stage and the introvert catches up with me, I just want to nap for half a day. So I think it really comes down to embracing who you are. Like if you're an introvert, just like embrace that. It's okay to be shy and introverted. You just have to think about, like, if you're really nervous about going on stage or putting your music out, you have to think about what's on the opposite side of that. So when you're just making music in your bedroom or something like that, and you're really nervous about sharing your art, think about a time when you first heard a really cool song from an artist that was very unknown, and how that made you feel. It really got you excited. It might have helped you get through a tough time. When you're starting to make music and put it out, you're doing a service to those other people. So you're almost, it's like you're giving back to the community. Your song has the chance to uplift someone out of a tough time. And if you don't put that music out, then that person won't have the opportunity to experience that. The same thing goes with shows. Yes, it's really nerve-wracking to get on stage. I think even the biggest artists still get nervous for every show they have to do, especially if the crowd size gets bigger and bigger. If you think about a show you went to and how awesome, like for example, Ed Sheeran is a very big introvert and he's very open about it. But when you go and see him live, he has incredible shows and he commands the crowd. And like, if you remember a time when you went to a show and how that experience made you feel, it's the same concept as putting your art out in the world, being able to uplift someone out of a tough time. Like, why do we go to shows? We go there to forget about our problems and feel good about life and celebrate life. So if you're doing the world a disservice by not sharing and performing your art with the world.
Yeah, that's some powerful stuff. That's really cool. Appreciate you for sharing that. So I guess another question that I would naturally have, like as an artist, right? Because a lot of our opportunities and stuff come from just knowing the right person, or just like happening to be talking to the right person at the right time to get on that one show that, you know, gets you in front of, you know, 200 people that then form the initial fan base for you, for example, right? So the whole like networking aspect is often a struggle for artists in general, but especially if you're introverted, because you're, you know, much less likely to kind of put yourself out there in front of other people. So what's been your experience like networking, like trying to get shows, things like that, as, you know, struggling with, you know, being introverted as well?
As an introvert, one of the things I like to do, or have loved to do my entire life, is play games. And think of like a community like World of Warcraft. I know it's a super ancient game, but I'm sure it's still relevant. The thing with those games, like Destiny 2 as well, like those games, you interact with other people in the world virtually. And thanks to COVID, a lot of people started interacting with each other virtually. If you take a step back and realize, like, if you are actually talking with people online virtually and you don't know, you've never seen their face, you only know their username, like you're chatting with them on a Discord server or something like that, that is networking. You interacting with people virtually, even if they don't ever see your face. So I've gotten opportunities through these message boards like Discord, or just messaging people on Instagram and never actually meeting them. Like all the shows that I've gotten, most of them were through some kind of online connection, either email, or we knew each other from like a forum or something like that. So you're still networking while you're doing these things. But the only caveat is you won't truly see success if you don't physically get out into the world. You can't just produce, like, yeah, you could become a sync writer, like only making music for sync music and never actually get out. But even in that realm, you still have to be able to physically meet with people. I believe, and in my own personal experience, being able to overcome your introvertedness, it's like a muscle. Like if you go to the gym and lift weights, like, yeah, you can get better at pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and chasing after these things, but it's okay you're going to feel exhausted afterwards, and it's okay to like take a step back and rest. As long as you're pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone in a healthy way and a healthy amount of times, you will see success. But yes, you can't see success in this industry without meeting people face to face, unfortunately. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think that it's kind of a misnomer that because you're introverted, like you can't do certain things. And I think those are like self-inflicted limitations. It's like, because I'm introverted, like for a long time, I thought that I couldn't be a front man to a band because I was introverted. And so when I was basically put in that position of being the front man in a band, then all of a sudden, like I figured, I'm like, oh, I could actually do this. And so I think that there's a kind of just a lot of like limitations that we place on ourselves that are really just not even real, but they end up impacting our reality because we allow them to. Essentially, we place those limitations and say, well, I can't do this because of XYZ, when in reality, it's like we need to either break that belief by putting ourselves out there and proving that we can, or have somebody come in and like basically break that belief for us via like a mentor or like even a friend or whatever. And I think that it kind of goes back to the live show aspect too. It's like a lot of introverted artists don't appear to be introverted live because they are able to bring that energy in that live environment. And it's really because they have learned the skill of performing. And so I think that we can like break all of these down into like skills. Like, yeah, just because you're introverted just means you have a natural inclination of being alone rather than with people, because being with people like wears you out. It's tiring. Versus if I like learn the skills of like, okay, like when I move this way on stage, people enjoy that. And so then I'm going to do that more. And you can just basically stack all of these like small things of like, you know, this is how I hold the microphone, or like, this is like, I shouldn't like bounce like a rabbit. I should like, you know, make bigger movements on stage or something like that. Basically in stacking all of these like tiny changes to your performance or the way you interact with the world together to then like appear as an extroverted person. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
I completely agree. I think there's an important distinction to make between being introverted and being shy. So the introverted part, it's a part of your identity. It's okay to be. It basically means being around people tires you out. Being shy is you don't like being in social, like you just can't interact with people at all. Being shy, that is something you can work on getting better at. Being introverted, not really. It's just ingrained in your personality, and that's okay. So you can embrace it. And on the point that you made about getting better at being on stage and things like that, yeah. To be honest, every front man I know of every band I've ever met is really introverted. I don't know what it is about it. Like even Patrick Stump from Fall Out Boy, he was notoriously a really introverted and really shy guy. Like it was very well known that he was a very shy guy. Now he commands the crowds of thousands of people, and you can see that just knowing Fall Out Boy for all these years, ever since the Warped Tour years, I've noticed that Patrick has become a very good performer. He probably is very introverted still, but he's mastered the skill of being an excellent performer. And then he probably goes and sleeps a while after he gets off stage.
That's interesting that you've like noticed that pattern. I kind of wonder if there's like some sort of like deep psychology behind that of people who want to be extroverted, because like I feel like that sometimes, like especially when I was in my early 20s, like I wanted to be that like extroverted big personality on stage and performing, but I just knew that like inherently wasn't my inclination. And so I wonder if like I desired that so much because I was introverted, and not necessarily like it wasn't the natural fit, but it was because I desired to be the front man because I was introverted, and I wanted to be basically someone that I didn't feel like I was at the time. I think that's actually leans into another conversation, which is the fact that people listen to music because they want to appeal to a certain identity that they want to become. So if you even backing up like just purchases in general. So like if I buy a Rolex watch, it's not really because I want a Rolex watch. I buy a Rolex watch because I want to be seen as somebody who wears a Rolex watch, a rich person, right? That's essentially why people buy Rolex watches, because they want to be part of this elite group. And I think it's the same thing with music. Like I want to listen to like metal because I want to identify as a metalhead, somebody who listens to metal, someone who's super hardcore about, XYZ. I feel like that has a ton to do with music in general, regardless of your genre, right? There's always like this kind of culture that surrounds that particular genre that you want to lean into to be able to attract that person into kind of your world as an artist. I don't know if like you've seen that from like your perspective as well, like as an artist, like what are you doing to either like encourage that, or I guess what are your thoughts around?
I definitely agree with you that people go to music as a means of escape for wherever reality they're currently in. And that's a healthy way to consume music. It's the same way with artists on the other side. We are becoming the front man of a band, or becoming a public figure as an electronic artist because we want to use music as a way to escape from whatever situation we want. But the thing is, what's really interesting is as you push yourself towards these kinds of people that you want to be, going back to the gym analogy, you're exercising a muscle and you're getting yourself closer to that kind of person. And then once you do reach a specific milestone where you're like, hey, I'm this less shy but still introverted guy, like I had no idea I could get to this point. What is next? And then you just keep moving forward and you just keep progressing as an individual and as a music person.
Yeah. So do you think about that? So when you're promoting and marketing your music, do you think about like the culture that surrounds your brand as an artist?
Yeah, it's one of the avenues that I've been the most curious about recently, because as I start to see people gravitate around me as an artist, I became curious as to what these people like and if their interests happen to be similar to mine. What's really interesting is the more genuine I get with the music I write, the more I attract people to the community around me that are like me, which is really something really fascinating and magical, to be honest. And it definitely makes me feel like I'm filling my cup. Like, for example, ever since I was really young, I was a huge fan of anime. My first show into anime was Pokemon or something like that, I think, for most of us. And then that progressed to like Yu-Gi-Oh! And then like the sky's the limit. Like, I never left my life. And I started to realize that my fans really like anime. I started to pair my music with more anime related visuals and things like that. And it has only strengthened the community, which is really, I feel really lucky that I'm able to connect in a more deeper level with my fans than just the music.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. And I think it's interesting that it's right when you started like creating music that's more and more like representative of where you feel like you're at is when you started to notice that shift. I think that's really significant because most people, when we're starting to write music, we're like thinking about the people who inspired us to write music to begin with, which is like not a bad place to be. Like, we had to start somewhere, and we probably don't have that much life experience to pull from to like write our own like super original music, but we're basically just kind of copycatting people that we see that we're inspired by initially, and then like through that journey, as we get better and progress and have more life experience, we then develop that unique voice that makes us unique as artists, and then we're able to then attract that fan base. So that's like really similar to us, because I think initially, like, if you're trying to make music that's not really representative of you as a person, then you're probably going to attract a fan base that is not actually similar to you, like you said. And then in addition to that, like, not only will you not be able to relate to them, but you'll also appear as inauthentic, like at a subconscious level. Like, they're not going to be really that attracted to you. And I think that's really wise, because like you're not being authentic, and that inherently just like creates this barrier of connection that they will never really be able to truly relate to you. But the more and more you go into that area of like truly just being more authentic, what do you think like was the barrier between you, like when you first started versus when you actually kind of started creating music that felt more authentic, more original to you? Like, what were those changes that happened between those 2 points for you?
It was a lot of like getting out of my own head. There was a period of time where I felt like I needed to make music that was popular and that would be successful and things like that. And it took me a while to realize that if you do that, and even if I've heard like really big artists, electronic artists, talk about this in interviews, but if you make music that's not authentic to you, and even if it's good and starts going viral and you get like start playing like festivals and things like that, at some point, once you're playing to like thousands of people at EDC, you're going to step back and realize that you really hate the music that you're making, and you're not having fun doing this job of like DJing this music to these people. And then your career and your life starts to not really feel fulfilled. And even though like years ago when I was experiencing this, I wasn't really I'm still not a big artist in my opinion. I started feeling less fulfilled by the music I was making because I was trying to pander to other people, because that's what I thought I had to do. But then once I made the shift to being more authentic with my music and actually putting more of my own feelings, my own experiences behind the songwriting, that's when I really started to garner this community around me that actually like me as a producer, and they like my music as well. So it's much more fulfilling, and you won't hate yourself. So just think about that. A lot of people don't think about what's on the other side, like, oh, I need to make this popular slap house in order to be successful. It's not true, really. And then like once you get to that, the other side of the fence, you realize the grass really isn't greener over there, and you wish you took a step back. I'll give you a perfect example. There's an artist called was an artist called RL Grime. He made trap music, and he was pretty big in the early 2010s. And same thing happened to him, is he realized that he didn't like making trap or playing trap. So he ended up sunsetting his artist project RL Grime, and started a new artist project called LS Dream. And he makes like really like niche, wonky dubstep with amazing dubstep. I love him as an artist, awesome music. But he's much bigger than he ever was before as LS Dream because he decided to put more of his authentic self into his music.
So do you feel like there's any like practical tips though that you implemented to be able to kind of shift your perspective? Like, for example, for myself, when I think about like, okay, you know, when I'm creating more authentic music that sounds more like me and what I want to create, I separate basically, like I stop consuming so much music. Like the less I listen to, the more I create, and the more I create like without listening to like a bunch of music, I actually come up with more original material. Do you feel like that was similar in your case, or, you know, was there anything else that like you did in that period of like shifting to just create more original, more authentic music?
Yeah, that's a good strategy, and it's one that I do too. Just listening to less music of like the similar vein that you're trying to do. And that's pretty much how my music comes out, is I'm not really listening to similar tracks or reference tracks when I'm making something. And then once it's done, then that's when I'll go and listen to a similar track just to make sure the sonic elements, like technically, it matches what other people are listening. So it's kind of like taking off my artist creative hat and putting on the technical hat. But in terms of overcoming some other tactics, get therapy is one thing. That's one strategy. And talk about these things. Like that's one thing that really, like, I'm a advocate for mental health. I know tons of people on the internet say that, but I myself have gone through counseling, and it was really during that time when I started to express my feelings. And also, like, if you can't afford therapy, just tell your friends about like how you don't don't feel authentic like with your music, or you feel like you need to make this kind of music in order to be successful, and just like express your feelings like that. And then also try expressing those feelings in your music as well. Use your music as an outlet to express what's happening inside of you. That's how a lot of the really big, massively successful artists, that's how they started, is once they started to channel their inner demons into music, that's when they started to really see some traction, because that's ultimately why people gravitate to music, because of the human connection.
So for everyone listening, where can they find you? Where can they connect with you if they want to learn more about Sauniks as the artist?
I'm pretty much on every social media that I'm aware of. Sauniks Official on Instagram, or sauniks.com, sauniks.com. You can get to pretty much everything else I have from there. I just had a song come out called Lovers, and best way is sauniks.com.
That's Sauniks for those listening. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you making time out of your schedule to come on, and we'll see you next time on the Prolific Super Producer Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Tyson. Peace, everybody.